Welcome to Illinois Lawmakers coverage of the fall veto session of the Illinois General Assembly. I'm Jak Tichenor, along with my colleague Peter Hancock of Capital News Illinois, our partner in State House coverage. Peter, this is one of the quietest veto sessions in recent memory, largely because there were no vetoes by the governor. So what are lawmakers up to here this fall?
Well, they call it the veto session, and I remember asking House Speaker Chris Welch that same question, what are you doing here without any vetoes? And he said, we just call it that. It's really, they haven't spoken to each other really since the spring. There's been an election since then. So right now, I think they're just kind of getting together, talking, strategizing about what's coming up in the spring session. And talking about the election and how they might need to respond to that. There has been some rumbling about for a possible lame duck session in January.
The balance of power didn't shift here any. The Democratic supermajorities are still in place. They didn't lose any seats. They didn't pick up any either, which they thought they might.
As far as we know, there were no party flips on any legislative seats. So it's exactly the same as it was last year.
You mentioned the lame duck session, and one of the things that we might hear of then is some measures by the Democratic majorities to try to solidify the gains they've made in areas that are their priorities, such as reproductive health rights, things like that. What are you hearing behind the scenes?
Pretty much the same thing. I mean, they are very concerned about what a second Trump administration might bring, especially given the number of things that he said he would do on day one. So there's some talk about protecting the rights of immigrants, protecting gains they made in the healthcare field, healthcare, immigration, those kinds of things. I think they want to really kind of protect the state's prerogatives in those areas.
Probably the biggest news is what happens next year. We just heard in the last few days that the Governor's Office of Management and Budget is giving us some very sobering news in terms of revenue projections, perhaps something as high as a $3.2 billion shortfall in the budget year that starts on July 1. Democrats don't have a lot of options when it comes to dealing with this thing.
Well, on the surface, no, they don't. And that's where state government is really not all that complicated. You have money coming in and you have money going out. Mm-hmm. The big expenditure items are Medicaid and health care for state employees, the cost of education, K through 12, and higher education. Those are really the big ones. And of course, the cost of labor, the cost of having a staff of state employees in all of the various agencies, most of which are governed by union contracts that have built-in pay raises, and the cost of making bond payments and making payments into the various retirement systems.
House Democrats had their hands full last spring trying to pass a budget because moderate members of their caucus wanted to put the brakes on new spending. What impact might they have in this spring's budget negotiations?
Well, right now it's looking like they might be kind of emboldened that they were, as seeing the future and realizing that we can't just keep increasing spending. Overall, state spending has increased pretty sizably under Governor Pritzker, and some of that is mandatory because increases in K through 12 education, increases in pension payments, increases in labor costs. And then you've got the general health care inflation, the cost of Medicaid and the cost of health care for state employees. And there have been some other things, but I think right now the fiscal conservatives are going to be in the driver's seat because of this looming budget hole that they're looking at.
So it's very much a case of stay tuned because the spring session is going to be, I think, very contentious.
And there are always more demands for money than there is money. So, I mean, it's just how legislative sessions go. It's always a matter of priorities.
Well, Peter Hancock, we will stay tuned. Thanks very much for your good work here on the ground.
Thank you.
Up next on Illinois Lawmakers, we're joined by Senate Majority Caucus Appropriations Leader Elgie Sims Jr., Democrat of Chicago. Good to have you with us, sir.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Jack.
We're in a veto session with no vetoes, so what are you working on?
Well, we've always got emergencies, issues that come up throughout the year, and we're taking those up. There's been a lot of action in the Senate and the House, and we're doing that. But we're also getting ready for a budget.
Well, that's one of the major reasons you're here. Of course, in the last few weeks, we've heard from the Governor's Office of Management and Budget that things are not looking good for next year. There's an estimated $3.2 billion deficit for next fiscal year. As you sit down and start going through the numbers, what are the key indicators you're looking at about what revenue streams are doing well, which ones are falling short? How are we getting to that situation?
Sure. I think it's important to note that this is not unique to Illinois. We're seeing, for instance, in Washington State, they're estimating a $10 billion deficit in their budget. You're seeing, for instance, in Florida, they've got hundreds of thousands of more people enrolled in their Medicaid program that's costing the state billions of dollars. So the problem is not unique to Illinois. This is something that's going on around the country. But we are seeing our personal income tax receipts are still strong. What we're seeing is a decline in our corporate income tax receipts. We're monitoring those very closely. We'll continue to have those discussions about what the challenges are and how we can address them.
We're about 3 months away from when the governor actually presents his proposed budget for the state in his budget address. What's going on behind the scenes right now at state agencies as they start looking at the numbers and seeing what their requests might be in light of all this?
Sure. Well, agencies are going through what's called the shadow budgeting process. That process where agencies are reviewing expenditures for the year, projecting out what they think the expenditures might be for the next year, making those proposals to the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, who will then put that in the Governor's budget proposal that we'll see in February. That's when and I always say, that's really when the session starts, because when the Governor proposes his budget, it comes to the legislature, and then we'll review those estimates coming from the agencies, but we'll also do our own independent investigation. So we'll look at expenditures, looking at all available resources, and then make some determinations to pass a budget that's balanced and in the best interest of the people of Illinois. Republicans,
of course, have criticized the current budget, which is $53.1 billion. They say that your spending priorities are well, for want of a better term, all messed up, that there's too much money in there for undocumented immigrants and so on. How do you respond to that criticism in light of this budget deficit that seems to be looming?
Well, I think I'll look at the Republicans' perspective as if they want to look at investments in education and health care as overspending, I'll let them make that case. What we are doing is we realize that a budget is a statement of our priorities. And our priorities are to take care of the most vulnerable, make sure that we are a compassionate but also a responsible state, and we're doing that. You're seeing us make more investments in pensions. You're seeing us make more investment in our rainy day fund. Our rainy day fund is larger than it's ever been, we're doing those kinds of things. Now, I'm very proud of the work that we're doing. I would remind everybody that we're on track to have a surplus in the current fiscal year also. Previous fiscal year, we ended with a cash balance of almost $5 billion on hand, but also with a surplus of over $120 billion.
As you look down the road, are
120 million. Sorry,
that's right. Are general tax increases on or off the table?
Well, again, I won't say anything is on or off the table at this point. We're not having discussions about those things right now. Right now, what we're doing is trying to get a full assessment of the issue and the problems. As I mentioned, what those cost drivers are and what those challenges are.
You mentioned the rainy day fund being at, for now, if it's not an all-time high, it's certainly a modern all-time high.
Yes.
All-time high. Is that an option to dip into that?
Well, we're not. That's not on the table. The rainy day fund, I'm not sure where it's raining right now. It might be cloudy, but I'm not sure it's raining yet.
There's not a lot of flexibility, though, when you actually do come to working at the margins of the budget, because a lot of that's federally mandated with Medicaid, things like that, court mandates and the like. So there's not a lot of room to work around the edges, is there?
No, absolutely. I would remind folks that almost 2/3 of the budget is mandated by court order, by legal obligation, federal law. It's about 40% of the budgets are those issues: pension obligations, debt service. The other 20 is education. So when you're looking at those numbers, that leaves about 40% of the budget that we're looking at and examining for those changes.
Lots of work ahead, and we'll be talking to you in the spring, Senator Sims.
Looking forward to it, Jack.
Thank you very much for your time on
My
Illinois
pleasure.
Lawmakers.
Thanks so much.
Deputy Senate Republican Leader Sue Rezin is our next guest on Illinois Lawmakers. Welcome back to the program. It's always good to see you.
Well, it's great to see you.
You know, I've been covering veto sessions since the early 90s, and this is the quietest one I think I've ever seen. There's nobody trying to move a new Bears stadium through or anything like that at the moment, like they did many years ago. What are the Senate Republicans working on today? What do they hope to accomplish before veto session's over?
Well, veto is very quiet. It is the quietest veto session that I've seen since I've been here. There's not a lot of bills that are being called to be voted on. However, what I think we'll see will happen in lame duck. Lame duck, all of the bills that have been bottlenecked for the last session have been held because of the election. And I think that they will be called at the beginning of January or during lame duck, when you have many legislators that may not be coming back into office because they lost their election, or they retired, or they decided not to run, voting on bills with no accountability. And these are controversial bills that are being held purposely to be called during lame duck.
Is there anything in particular that stands out in your view as something that you'd be on the watch for?
Well, I certainly, if you look at the budget and the governor's budget projections for next session, we are anticipated to be or have a $3 billion deficit for the next budget year. And that's problematic because, as we've said all along, for the past several years, you can't use pandemic funds to plug your budget. They're one-time funds and they should be used accordingly. But unfortunately, the governor and his administration have been using these one-time funds to help balance the budget. Well, here we are. The funds are gone. And now, according to the governor's own people, we are projected to have a $3 billion deficit next year. Not to mention, we have other financial pressures coming from our transportation system and the call to kind of consolidate RTA, CTA, Metra, PACE all into one. And that becomes, because they're losing money, but it becomes problematic because there's also a shift in power. Who will oversee these transportation companies or transportation agencies?
That would be one of the biggest changes in Illinois state government in decades, probably, if the plans move forward to see what kind of consolidation might happen. And you're always, as you say, there's a problem with deficits there. There's also the problem of trying to make sure that the ticket prices are as affordable as possible for folks to go to work and school.
And that's a concern of ours as well. I mean, if we've heard one thing, especially after this past election, is people, middle-class families that I represent in my district, are very concerned about the high cost of living. They're reminded each and every day when they go to buy their groceries about how groceries have increased. They're reminded when they go to take the train into work, if ticket prices go up, or if they're paying rent, if rent goes up. They're reminded each and every day about the increase in costs, and that's why you've seen a cataclysmic shift across the board in this past election. We need to be very, very careful about imposing any new taxes or fees on riders, taxpayers, whoever it is in the state of Illinois. But let me go back to the $3 billion deficit that we have. I mean, our concern is the budget under this administration has increased 30% in the last 5 years. $13 billion has been increased to this budget, and we knew that at some point there was not enough revenue to to balance the budget, and here we are.
We've got about less than a minute left. So if Republicans have a seat at the table with the Democrats in the spring, with that budget deficit looming, where would you begin to make adjustments?
Well, first of all, you need to we need to have a seat at the table. So, I mean, you're making an assumption that we have a seat at the table. We're in the super minority. We have not had a seat at the budget table for several years now. So when you have one party control, they're controlling the budget and they're making the decisions.
Senator, thank you so much for your time. It's always good to have you on the program. Deputy Senate Republican Leader Sue Rezin of Morris, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Up next on Illinois Lawmakers, Democratic House Majority Leader Robyn Gabel. Good to have you back on the program, Leader.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's been a very quiet veto session thus far. No vetoes by Governor J.B. Pritzker to contend with. So what have you been working on the last couple of weeks?
So we've been working on just some cleanup bills, just some simple things that the departments have given us, changes that they need that are non-controversial. We're looking at a TIF bill, but things that are agreed upon by both chambers.
So you're talking about a TIF bill, that's tax increment financing districts, which are used to fund business development?
Correct, just to extend some of them.
Some sobering news out of the Governor's Office of Management and Budget in the last couple of weeks, projecting something like a $3.2 billion deficit for the fiscal year that starts July 1 of next year. The Illinois economy's done pretty well since COVID. What's the problem? Which revenue streams aren't performing up to snuff?
I believe it's our sales tax that's decreasing somewhat. You know, we've had a balanced budget every year. We have had grim forecasts in the past, and I think that, and yet we have managed to have a balanced budget. We've managed to pay down more of our pension obligations. So, you know, I think that we take it seriously, and we're going to go line by line through the budget, looking through it and being responsible. And at the end, I'm sure we'll have another good budget.
The Republicans, of course, have said over the last several years that your priorities have been out of whack in some of the spending areas that you focused on, like immigrant health and the like, that money would be better spent on Illinois citizens.
As I said, we'll be going line by line and really trying to determine what's the best for the people of Illinois.
Is it too early to talk about things like general tax increases, or is anything like that on the table?
It's too early.
Okay. Are there any areas that you might be thinking of in terms of cuts? There's not a lot of flexibility. Now, you look at a $53.1 billion budget and you think, oh, there's a lot of areas that you could nibble away at here and there, but a lot of that's mandated by federal law.
Yes.
When it comes to things like health care and the like, and court mandates. So how much flexibility is there really to go in and work at the margins of this thing?
Yeah, there are not big pots of money. There are not very many big pots of money that we can just cut out of the budget. So, you know, and when you look at our budget, most of it is spent on health care, human services, and education. And, you know, when I ask people who say, well, you need to cut the budget, I'm saying, where would you like me to cut? Education, health care, human services. But we will be looking to see where we can make reasonable cuts.
Is there any discussion of perhaps dipping into the state's rainy day fund? The state over the last couple of years has made significant investments in setting aside money for a time perhaps such as this.
At this point, there have been no discussions about that.
Turning to the national scene for a moment, in the veto session, there was some speculation that House Democrats and Senate Democrats might be doing some things to consolidate the gains they've made in areas like reproductive health care, minimum wage, things like that. I haven't seen anything kind of bubble to the surface yet. What are you talking about behind the scenes, if you can give us some insights into that?
Well, I will tell you, I'm glad I live in Illinois. I am glad that we were able to enshrine reproductive freedom for us here in Illinois. I think that there are going to be a lot of discussions about a lot of things, not just about Donald Trump. As you know, we are committed to defending people in Illinois' rights, but we also are committed to controlling costs for families, and we've shown that in our last budget, and we'll continue to do that.
Would some of this perhaps come up in the lame duck session, the first couple of days of January before the new General Assembly is seated?
There will be some bills in the lame duck, primarily bills that we weren't able to finish when we ended session in May. I think that it's going to take us some time to look through some of the laws and really figure out if there are specific things we need to do to protect people's rights. But we will certainly have that top of mind.
House Majority Leader Robyn Gabel of Evanston, thank you so much for taking the time out and joining us on Illinois Lawmakers. Always appreciated.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Deputy House Republican Leader Ryan Spain of Peoria is our next guest on Illinois Lawmakers. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Jack.
Good to have you here. No vetoes this session, and it's been very quiet around the State House thus far. What's been going on behind the scenes for the House Republicans?
Well, it is veto session. There are no vetoes to be considered with unilateral control resting with the other party in Springfield right now. But we've been doing a lot to keep busy, really making sure that the message received from the November 5th election is developed and cultivated here in Illinois. And so we want to make sure as a caucus that we are responding to the things that voters care about and the messages that they sent in the November election.
Given the power differential here with the Democrats having supermajorities in both houses, how does that translate into action for the Republicans?
Well, there's two things. I mean, first we need to hear the messages from the election. Voters care about the economy. They care about immigration. We need to make sure that the issues that are being considered here in the State House are reflective of those concerns. The state of Illinois is lagging badly behind our neighbors and our other peers throughout the country in every economic measurement that you can imagine. I mean, we're in last place with high unemployment, population declines, issues that are making it really difficult, and we need to start responding to those issues about how we can deliver economic improvement in Illinois instead of chasing a social agenda or divisive issues that really aren't the things that voters have said they care about.
You mentioned social agendas, and in talking to the Democrats who have been on the program thus far, they're concerned about what the Trump administration and the incoming Republican Congress may have in store for some of the issues that they care about, and some of that might move forward in the lame duck session just before the new House is seated here.
Yeah, well, I'm always concerned about lame duck sessions. We've seen some very bad policy outcomes for the people in Illinois as the result of lame duck sessions when lawmakers are literally on their way out the door and won't be held accountable to voters again. But I'm concerned about the state of Illinois not benefiting from the type of economic growth that we are expecting from a new administration and Republican control in Congress. And when Governor Pritzker stands up and says that he will protect the people of Illinois, I'm worried that those protections will be a result for us that we are not riding the same wave that the rest of the country will be. We have high energy prices, we have high income taxes, we have a lot of structural problems here in the state of Illinois, and I don't want to see continuing to double down on those same bad policy outcomes.
One of the things that's come up in recent days is the latest projection by the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, and it looks pretty bleak. They're talking about a budget deficit possibly in the realm of plus $3 billion. What would Republicans do if you have a chance to get a seat at the table with the Democrats and go through this throughout the spring?
Sure.
As far as line by line.
Well, I hope that that's a message that the governor and the majority party have received, that voters expect that we should work together, that the same results that their unilateral control have delivered for many years now are no longer acceptable. I think, it's a big wake-up call to me when I see the performance of President Trump coming through so strongly for the state of Illinois. That really is voters sending a message. And now with us facing more than a $3 billion operating deficit, $700 million fiscal cliff for our transit agencies, multiple budget pressures in the city of Chicago. We have got to do some things differently. And I hope that it is not the intention of Governor Pritzker just to look at raising everyone's taxes as the solution. And that has often been the response that we see from Illinois Democratic lawmakers.
We've got about another half a minute left. I'm curious about something. Not all Democrats in this House were comfortable with passing the current budget of $51.3 billion. Any chance that Republicans might leverage some things behind the scenes with the moderate Democrats to have a different outcome?
Yeah, I think there's a great alliance that is possible of working together in a bipartisan way. That's what we want to see more often. And I think even though we have an artificial supermajority created through gerrymandering in Illinois, there are still a lot of people in the Illinois General Assembly that are willing to work together to get things done.
Deputy House Republican Leader Ryan Spain of Peoria, thanks very much for your time on Illinois Lawmakers. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jack.
Illinois Lawmakers continues with Peter Hancock of Capital News, Illinois. Peter, I'd like to circle back on the budget for a moment before we go. The projected $3 billion plus deficit is bad enough, but there are other spending pressures we're looking at, like the mass transit fiscal cliff now that the federal COVID dollars are drying up. Chicago public schools are asking for more money and so on. So it looks like the Democrats, who are in the driver's seat when it comes to the majorities here, have their work cut out for them in the spring.
They really do, and I'm going to be especially interested in this mass transit thing, because this is something that I think is happening in cities, major cities all across America, especially in light of after the pandemic. Ridership on mass transit systems plummeted during the pandemic because everybody was staying home. And then after the pandemic, you see people started realizing how to telecommute, so there's not as much demand for it. So everybody is looking for new ways of trying to fund these systems, and while it seems like just a Chicago-specific issue, it really is in everybody's interest that major cities, not just Chicago, have functioning mass transit systems. It's just how are we going to pay for them going forward.
And in the last 30 seconds or so, one of the things that they're talking about seriously is trying to consolidate all the mass transit agencies in the metropolitan Chicagoland area.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. You're talking about when you consolidate agencies, you're consolidating jobs in power, and that's always a difficult thing to get through.
And you're looking at all of, you're talking about Metra, RTA, PACE, and CTA. It's going to be a giant job to do, and we'll see how it all works out.
Probably a multi-session effort.
I think you're probably right about that. Peter Hancock of Capital News, Illinois, thanks so much for your insights. That's it for the Fall Veto Session edition of Illinois Lawmakers. From all of us at Capital News, Illinois, so long now from Springfield.